I'm back, ladies and gentlemen,
Oh, yeah.
boys and girls, to the Cold War episode 284. Ray, before we get started, I did promise to share with you my story of the week.
Please.
So, Tuesday night, about midnight, I go to bed, lie down, reading. I start getting these sharp stabbing pains in the left side of my rib cage.
Right.
Just left of my nipple, which you know so well.
Right.
And I was like, ooh, that's not good.
No, not a good way.
I say, which side's my heart on again? Oh, yeah, that side. Oh. So I waited a minute or two and it didn't go away. So I went downstairs and I jumped on ChatGPT and I said, these stabbing pains in my heart. What should I do? And it was like, don't fuck around. Either call 000, which is our version of 911 here, or go to the emergency room. So I did neither of those, but I did wake Chrissy up and say, hey, I got this thing. So we went downstairs and I called 13 Health, which is like phone doctor, phone medical service. You get talk to a nurse.
Telemedicine. Right? Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's not emergency, I need an ambulance, because I'm like 99.9% sure this is nothing.
Right.
Because I know, I cannot die. I was promised that by the devil at the crossroads. And secondly,
right,
my vitals are good. You know, I saw my cardiologist a year ago, and my GP, and my bloods are great, and everything's great.
Yeah, great.
But at our age, you know, you don't want to fuck around and find out, right? So I call 13 Health, which isn't the emergency, but it's the thing. And I talked to this nurse for 15 minutes. She asked me a bunch of questions. And then she goes, how's it now? And I'm like, it's fine, but I'm sitting up. Should I lie down and test it? She goes, yeah, lie down. So I lay down and the pains immediately come back.
Right.
She goes, yeah, you should go to an emergency room straight away.
Shit.
So this is about 20 past 12, middle of the night. I jump in the car. I drive to the nearest hospital. Go to the it's about 10 minutes away. Go to the emergency room. Sit there for 4 hours. I mean, I see a nurse in the triage. I see the triage nurse, and I'm honest. Like she goes, and I'm like, listen, it's probably nothing.
Right.
I'm fit. I'm healthy. No other symptoms. No pain in my not like a horse sitting on my chest.
Right.
No pains down my arm. Is your arm sore? Yeah, my arm's sore, but I did 2 hours of kung fu tonight.
So, take that.
So I think my arm is sore from that.
It's legit.
Not from anything else. So like, I'm not like going, oh my God, I'm about to die. So I don't mind that I have to wait when we have guys coming in with ODs and there's car accidents and there's all the other shit. And it's public health, public emergency room for people, you know, in the US, this is called public health care where you get looked after and but as part of that, you know, you're prepared to take your turn, right?
Yes.
Triage is triage for a reason. The people that need the help the first get the help the first. I'm happy to sit and wait because I know it's probably not. I mean, it could be wrong, but probably not an emergency.
Right.
4 hours I'm sitting in the waiting room. About 4:30 in the morning, somebody collects me. They take me out the back, put me on an ECG, take my blood, do an X-ray. I'm in a bed in a room for 2 hours. 3 hours.
Wow.
Until they finally say, a couple of doctors come in and out. They finally go, yeah, you're fine.
We can't
go home.
Find anything. Thanks, but better safe than sorry.
You probably just tweaked a muscle, pulled something. But when I was sitting in the waiting room, our old friend from Oklahoma, Jason Palmer, long-term fan of the shows, texted me. I hadn't heard from him for a month or two. He goes, hey, man, what's going on? How are things? Our country's fucked. I was like, yeah, I know. I said, well, funny you should reach out because I'm sitting in the emergency room. I got these pains in the side of my chest kind of thing. I said, it's probably nothing. But if you don't hear back from me, it means I won and I beat Ray to the finish line. Tell him I said I won.
Suck it, Ray. Suck it. Yeah.
And then I turned my phone off and I'd taken a Phenergan, like an antihistamine before I went to bed, which helps me sleep at night.
Right.
And so I'm drowsy as fuck. I'm trying to sleep in the waiting room, but you can't because there's people screaming and sirens and all the shit going on. And so Jason does send me a text back, but I don't reply. And then the next day, I get home at 8 o'clock in the morning. I nap. I get up. I work. I nap. I work. I nap. Go to Kung Fu. I don't reply to him until the next day. Dude's texting me like, dude, are you alive? Holy fuck.
Right.
He's texting Chrissy.
Right.
Like, is Cameron alive?
Yeah.
Like, oh, shit, sorry, man. Yeah, I'm fine. It was all good. But it was sweet of him to be checking in on me.
Yes. He was going to audition.
So that was my story for the week. You know, it was a whole bunch of fucking nothing.
Yeah.
But, you know, again, the one time at our age you don't take it seriously is you probably die.
Exactly.
So I have a responsibility to you.
Right.
And Chrissy and Fox and the twins. But to you mostly, that I take care of myself. Because without me, what are you going to do?
I don't even want to.
What are you going to do? Who are you going to talk to?
Well, I guess I could do puppets.
Right? Who are you going to talk
I could do
to?
a Cam puppet, and I could do a Ray puppet, and I can. That's all I've got.
Yeah.
That's sad. Anyway,
it'd be like your sex life.
Imaginary.
Last time on the Cold War show,
yes,
we're talking about Cuba.
Yeah.
Last time on the show, we were talking about after the Spanish-American War, the U.S. occupied Cuba, and they forced elections, but they tried to engineer it in a way that the party that won would be pro the island, the country becoming part of the United States.
Yes.
And instead, a party won that chose independence.
Right. Close. It was close.
The U.S. was like, fuck all y'all, and introduced the Platt Amendment in the United States, which basically said, yeah, we're going to let Cuba be independent, except we're going to run its military and its economy and call it an independent nation.
Right.
But we're going to reserve the right to intervene with our military whenever we don't like where it's going.
Right. You can be free, independent every leap year. Other than that, we will be ready to storm down and kick open the door and do what we have to do. And as more American businesses get involved, the Americans are more inclined to come and make sure their investors are happy and safe and snug in their beds at night.
Called it free-ish.
Oh.
You can be free-ish.
Free light.
Democrat-ish.
Right. Tish. Yeah. And we have guns-ish galore. So call us if you need us. Yeah.
The first elected president of the pseudo-republic of Cuba was Tomás Estrada Palma.
Oh, yeah.
He's a Cuban-born American citizen, had naturalized U.S. citizenship. And he's got kind of a great story, this guy. His maternal grandfather, Don Tomás de Palma, was a rich landowner.
The best kind.
And, we'll get into Estrada's story more in a second. But for the next 60 years, the Cuban experience was one of endless violence, civil wars, American intervention, military revolts, gangsterism. It was just a clusterfuck. And I think, and the reason why, I love to tell these sort of story behind the story kind of stuff is I suspect that a lot of people in the West who don't know much about the history of Cuba have this vague idea, as I did when I was in my early 20s and I wasn't paying attention. I'd heard of Fidel Castro. He was still around, obviously, at the time.
Right.
But I had this perception that this guy just came out of nowhere and dictator, took over Cuba. Fuck y'all, this is my country now.
Right.
Starts causing problems everywhere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So what I'm hoping people will get at this is the backstory, like we told the backstory of Ho Chi Minh, and his fucking journey to try and get independence for his people in Vietnam.
Right.
It's the same thing here. Like Cuba was a clusterfuck until Castro came along and said, "This ends here, right? It ends here. It ends now. It's Cuba for the Cubans. Get the fuck out of my country.
Right.
We're going to run it our way." So Estrada was elected in 1901. He was elected unopposed.
Mhm.
By the way, in that 60 years of complete clusterfuckery,
Right.
the country also had spectacular economic growth and terrific prosperity for a very small selection of people, mostly white landowners.
Yeah.
Did very, very well in the next 60 years. Everyone else was fucked, but the landowners did very well.
Can we agree?
So Estrada
that their
gets elected
food-
unopposed. How do you get what? Yeah, what?
Just real quick, no matter good times, bad times, it's Cuba, beautiful women, good food. That was pretty much a steady trajectory. Everything else is all over the place. I just wanted that on the record, if I may. That's it.
Good times, bad times, things aren't really clear. I don't even know the rest of that song.
I didn't know it was.
Yeah,
a
that's
song.
good. Yeah, Michael Jackson fits in everything. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
So there were two political parties at the time, Ray. The Republicans,
Right.
who were mostly conservative and wanted national autonomy,
Mm-hmm.
make Cuba great again, I think was their motto, headed by a guy called Jose Miguel Gomez,
Right.
who's a revolutionary, and the National Liberals, who were a populist sort of party, wanted Cuba to go towards local autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was headed by a guy called Alfredo Zayas, also a revolutionary, but not really a military guy.
Right.
He had been part of the revolution, but not really he was more of a philosopher.
Sure. Yeah.
Philosopher of Cuba.
Armchair.
And but both parties supported Estrada
Right.
to be president. Two political parties in an election,
Yep.
both going,
Yeah.
let's make this guy president.
We'll meet here. We'll meet at Estrada Avenue.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's kind of weird. Why don't you explain that to people?
Explain what exactly, because I need you to explain to me so I can explain it to them.
Two political parties,
Yeah.
both with the same candidate
Right.
to be president.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, I know that, and here's the thing that you were touching on a second ago. When these guys, now that they're in charge of their own country, what do they know? They know what they saw before them. And what they saw before them was Spain. And Spain, whoever had the position who was ruling Cuba technically for Spain, pretty much did what everybody else does. They were doing it for personal enrichment. So for what I took from this was that this guy Estrada was acceptable for both parties, because there was another guy named Masso who would have been a lot more popular with the regular Cubans, but and I don't want to give anything away, but let's just say General Wood made it sure he did not win. I don't want to cast aspersions, but he fucking rigged the system. But so as far as I could tell, Estrada was he was just acceptable to both sides, and he would toe the line. He would make the Americans happy. The Americans would continue to invest. And because we are talking about the elites, it doesn't matter that it's from two different parties. They're still going to benefit in a general way as the Americans bring more cash ashore. That's the best I can do.
Yeah, I think you're right. But he was also, I think most importantly, is that Estrada was acceptable to the Americans.
Good point. Good point.
Because you remember, part of the deal that the Americans made with the Cubans is, we'll let you have elections, we'll let you have quasi-independence, but you have to do it in a way that we're happy with.
Right.
You have to elect a government that is acceptable to the US.
Yeah.
And the two major political parties figured that the US really wanted Estrada. Now, Estrada was one of the leaders of the revolution along with Martí. And after Martí died, he was really the guy. He'd sort of been the backbone of the revolution against the Spanish.
Yeah.
And he was sort of the best candidate, the one that was a responsible figure in the eyes of the U.S. occupation.
Yes.
And so he was sort of he was a U.S. citizen, as I said before, and he'd lived and worked and was actually at the time of this election living in New York.
Right.
He didn't even go to Cuba for the election.
No.
Didn't campaign.
No.
He was
Oh,
in New York.
am I elected?
Just chilling.
Yeah, drinking espresso.
It's always the best way to become president of a country is you don't even have to be there at the time.
You're in Soho,
You
just chilling. Yeah.
just chilling. Yeah. Ideally, you want to be made president of multiple countries
That would-
at the same. Have your choice.
Right.
It's like dating.
Yes.
You know,
like
you
Love
don't want
Island.
to pick one woman and try and
Right.
become the president of her.
I got
You want to have a range of women
or islands.
and go,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I'm the fussy. I can be president of any of
Who
you.
wants me more?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he was just chilling, and he was a friend to America, friend to Wall Street, and so the major political parties in Cuba knew they could see the writing. You know, they knew what was up.
Yeah.
They know what is up, but they don't know up is up. Something like that. It's a Fatboy Slim song from the fucking mid-90s for you kids out there.
I'll take your word for it.
He knows what is up, but he don't know what is up. No, something I can't remember.
Something's
I
up.
was singing at Kung Fu last night, but no, I can't remember.
Okay.
So on December 31st, 1901, Estrada Palma was elected president. Now, going back a bit, he'd already been president once before,
Right.
if you read this, but in 1876, he was made the provisional president of Cuba during the Civil War. He got arrested by the Spanish,
Yeah.
and they said,
Go.
"Who are you?"
Yeah.
And he said, "I'm the president of Cuba."
Really?
And they were like,
really?
"Oh, you're a funny guy. Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm the president of Cuba." That's all he said.
Right.
So they arrested him and eventually sent him to the US in exile. He became a school teacher
Right.
in New York City and worked with Martí to build support for a political revolution in Cuba, which then ran for the next 25 odd years.
Yeah. But he's not exactly going to sacrifice himself for the good of the average Cuban person, which the Americans know, which those two political parties in Cuba know, like you said. That makes him quite acceptable to the right people or the white people. Same thing. We'll get to that later, but he's acceptable to the right people.
Mormons like to say white and delightsome. And his government was mostly for the white and delightsome part of the population.
Right.
And continued to sell off land and assets to Americans. Now, I found this interesting. A lot of Cubans had migrated to the US in the previous decades during the Civil Wars and just the Spanish occupation. It wasn't just I think people sometimes have this idea that Cubans going to America or the United States was a thing that happened only after Castro's revolution, but it had been going on for a century before Castro. It's just over there. Let's just jump on a boat and go over there and do that thing.
Yeah.
But then a lot of them were coming back. A lot of them had gone to America, made some money, had made friends with Americans that had money, and then when there was this after the revolution and the US was running Cuba, a lot of those people started coming back with their American money.
Yes.
And started buying up stuff. But most of the people that were coming back were, or coming over to Cuba to buy stuff, were Americans and or, Spanish that were still there from the occupation.
Oh, yeah.
Mostly white people buying up the land.
Right. Can I just say something real quick? Because we've been stressing this, and I want everybody to know it hasn't gone anywhere. During this presidential election, again, I mentioned the gentleman, Bartolome Masso, who could have ran. He was beloved by the common people, but General Wood rigged the election so he couldn't win. Not that he ran, but he couldn't. I don't even think he could run. But I tried to look up how do you rig an election? I mean, we talk about it all the time, but how do you really rig an election? What General Wood did was he appointed 5 of Estrada's supporters to the Electoral Commission. So they're the ones making decisions about hanging chads, about who can vote, who can't, about everything. And when it's 5 of your people on the committee, you're going to win. And so again, General Wood knew exactly what he was doing. Estrada is like, no, you cheated. I can't possibly accept. No, he was very happy to take this position. So again, it's all the certain people on one side of the fence, all the poor on the other. And this is not going to change anytime soon because of the way the Spanish did it. The Cubans are quite at home with corruption. It's just how things are done.
I think General Wood had made it very clear to Marceau that he wasn't going to win.
Yeah.
It was like, well, let's put it this way. If he did win, the US wouldn't leave. It was
right.
like, listen,
That's right.
Do you remember we said free-ish, democrat-ish?
Yeah.
You are completely free to elect anyone you want,
Right.
as long as it's the guy that we want
Exactly.
to run the place.
I've got 2 words for you. And a future president of Cuba actually did this. Shark bait. As in, if you don't do what I want and you piss me off, there's a decent chance you become shark bait. I'd hate to see that happen to you. You seem like a nice guy, like the cut of your jib. Now you can fuck off. And Maso fucked off, and that's why he still lived through the presidential election, because he didn't ruffle any feathers.
Didn't live much longer.
No.
He died in 1907.
Yeah,
but
he got through that.
I think, and again, this is instructive for people that are trying to understand how the American style of empire and colonialism has worked in the 20th and in the 21st century, is you give the impression that a country is free. And I've gone through and read a lot of the US newspaper accounts of Cuba from this time, and they're all talking about independent Cuba, free Cuba, how Cuba's so independent and so free, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
But of course it wasn't. It was the illusion of freedom, the illusion of independence. But really, it was still being run to a very large degree by the Americans behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But just wasn't as, they didn't make a big deal out. And this is what I keep saying to people about Trump. Like, Trump with his tariffs the last couple of weeks has just tried to bully the world into doing something, and it's backfired massively.
Yeah, uncouth.
On the United States.
Yeah.
But, I keep explaining to you, well, the US has always bullied countries into doing what it wants, but they do it behind the scenes.
Whispers.
It's done, in diplomatic channels, behind the scenes, behind closed doors.
Right.
You don't want to be too overt about the bullying. But when you're an empire, that's what you do.
Yeah.
You use your power to get what you want. Trump is just, way more uncouth about it, but this isn't a new thing. But, the way that he's gone about it is obviously
He's just showing everybody.
Pissed everybody off, right?
And just to let everybody know what's going to happen in Cuba now that they're a republic, now that they've got their first president, putting everything else that we've set aside, what we're going to find, and this isn't going to change anytime soon, is you've got the whites, the right kind of people. You got the Spanish who are still there. We'll get into that later. And you've got all the poor people. And a lot of those poor males were the ones who actually did the fighting and the dying. So they're like, okay, we sacrificed all. My house was burned down. I lost my family, but I stayed with the army. I fought. I got hurt, but we won. When my pay is coming, in whatever form, maybe it's a grant to start a business or to buy some land or to get a home or to get an education, like a GI Bill, something. They're going to reward me somehow, and they're just waiting and waiting. And of course, nothing's coming along, because once you have power, you don't have to care what the poor person thinks. If you take away their vote, if you've got an army, you can ignore them. So as this is going on, even like you just said, everything's cool on the surface, but underneath, things are simmering. There's racial tensions, there's economic tensions, there's political tensions, and it just keeps boiling up. And occasionally it's going to pop above the surface. And then that's when someone's going to have to do something, because men with machetes cannot be ignored. So again, it's between the Americans, the way the Spanish did things and the way things are being done now. It's all corrupt, and they're ignoring the poor, and they're doing that to a degree at their own peril.
The majority of the population is black. The poor people are black.
Exactly.
And as we've said in previous episodes, as soon as the Civil War was over, the blacks were put back in the category of, we don't give a fuck what you think. And there was a general concern amongst the whites in Cuba and in the United States that the blacks might take over.
Yeah.
And it ended up like Haiti. And so they didn't want to allow that.
Yes.
So most of the people that had any importance or influence in Cuba at the start of the 20th century were white and had experience living in the United States. And of course, they welcomed the United States' influence in the country and probably benefited from it. And that's, again, another important thing to understand is when we have countries like this that are run to whatever degree by colonial power, there's always usually a minority that are doing very well out of that arrangement. Not that different from the Vichy in France during World War II, right? If you're a collaborator with an occupying power, you're going to do really well, and you're going to support that occupying power, and you're going to say lots of great things about them and what they've done for you in your country.
Right.
And if that occupying power gets removed, you're going to be pissed and you're going to bitch and moan and complain, and your children and your children's children for generations will complain about the people that remove you, like the Cubans that went to Florida after Castro took over and continue to bitch about the revolution and the Castro, probably because they and their family were doing quite well under the U.S. occupation version of Cuban administrations for 60 years.
Living high on the teat, as it will.
Yeah. You're gonna do very well. You're gonna be pissy if things change because
don't take the teat away.
Access to the
hate that.
Don't take the teat. Yeah.
Sorry.
Now, it's hard to get numbers about how much of the land Americans owned in Cuba at the time, but I did find some numbers.
Right.
More than 13,000 people from the United States acquired title to land in Cuba by 1905.
Damn.
Brought in about $50 million worth of investment. And about 60% of the sugar mills were owned by American individuals or corporations.
Yeah, fortunes were made.
So there's no comprehensive data about how much land U.S. citizens actually own, how much of the habitable land in Cuba they owned.
Yeah.
But most historians estimate that it was a lot.
Right.
They just came in and gobbled it all up.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say it was more than it should have been, considering it was someone else's country. I don't know, just an idea, but when it's that easy to notice, clearly, it's like when we were talking earlier, a couple of episodes ago, when they were literally rigging things left and right so corporations could buy land from these people who had certain claims to it. So again, and as we're going to see, now is the time to get in on the ground floor of sugar, because there are people, it's going to change their lives, but we'll get into that. But yeah, so they're just coming in, and I mean, you think about it, Cuba's been fighting for years, decades. They have nothing. The country's been wrecked. And now these rich, affluent white people who come from a land of stability are coming in with their millions, buying everything up. I mean, it must have been a whirlwind for the Cubans who they know how to fight. They can pick up a gun and machete and fight, but you want me to politically or legally, cross swords with you? They're not really game on how to do that. And the ones who do know how to do it are working with the Americans. They're being paid by the Americans. So again, they were just hit with a left hook that they did not know how to respond to. And by then it's too late to do anything.
Very similar to the story that we told about Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th century. Exactly the same thing happened.
Yes.
These European Jews came into Palestine in the last decades of the Ottoman Empire, and then the decades when the British ran it as a protectorate, and just started gobbling up all of the land.
Legally, financially.
Difference in this.
Yes, just grabbing it up. Sorry. Go ahead.
Or illegally. Illegally
right.
in many.
Yeah.
Because they weren't supposed to be doing it under the Ottoman Empire and even under the British protectorate, the mandate.
But money talks.
But they would they would just bribe officials, et cetera, et cetera. And, you're a local who's lived there for generations, and you're just having these foreigners come in, buy up all the land, kick all of the workers off the land, replace them with their own people, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, slightly different, but a very similar story. When the Americans have the occupational government, they deliberately sort of destroyed the financial basis of all of the land, the valuations of the land.
Yeah.
Let Americans come in and buy it all, and then let them extract all of the wealth out of the country, and the people that had fought all these civil wars and put up with the Spanish occupation get fuck all.
Yeah.
So in 1906, so Estrada's elected 1901.
Right.
In 1906, 5 years later, he asked the US to send troops into the country to help him quell a rebellion. And he did this as part of the Platt Amendment. So he'd gone for re-election, and the elections were again considered to be rigged, but this time around, the people are a little bit more upset about it. They've got another 5 years of just watching their land get sold off to Americans, and for the country to get none of the upside of the end of the Spanish occupation. And 24,000 armed rebels with machetes tried to overthrow the government.
Yeah, they're marching on the Capitol going, no, we've given you time, we've given you opportunities, you're not listening to us. Maybe you'll listen to this. Yeah, and these all have battle experience. I mean, this is serious. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at the time, not only did Cuba not have a professional army because the Americans probably didn't want them to, they had like a 3,000 man force, but they're scattered all over the islands. It's not going to do any good. So these 24,000 people are a genuine threat to stability, to the government, to the sugar mills owned by white Americans. But most importantly, they've got to be a threat because they kept yelling out, where are the white women at? I mean, just, you've got race, you've got finance, you've got nationals. Everybody is freaking the fuck out. Americans, we need you to come in now and save us from ourselves.
The opposition party in this election was led by the two guys that had supported Estrada in 1901, Jose Miguel Gomez and Alfredo Zayas. And this time around, they had sort of united. They were trying to run against him, and they were prevented from doing so, they said, due to government violence and intimidation.
Yeah.
And so there's a rebellion, a revolt.
Yeah.
Now, the president of the United States at the time was our old friend Teddy Roosevelt, and he didn't want to have to send troops.
Right.
It's not a good look to send troops down.
Yeah.
So instead, he sent William Taft, who at the time was the Secretary of War, and Bobby Bacon, Billy Taft and Bobby Bacon.
Billy and Bobby.
Billy the T, Bobby the B, who was the Assistant Secretary of State, to try and negotiate between Estrada and the rebels. But Estrada didn't want a negotiation.
Exactly.
He was not all about negotiating.
Yeah.
He was like, my way or the fucking highway. So what did he do, Ray?
Well, it's brilliant because if you think about it, what power does the first president of Cuba have against the president of the United States? None. Zip, zada, nothing. So, but there is one piece of kryptonite. There is one little chance that something that Roosevelt cannot ignore. So what Estrada does is he goes, I'm going to resign. And I'm going to have my cabinet resign, and there's going to be no government. And if there's no government, there's either going to be a civil war or all these, excuse my language, non-white people with machetes are going to take over, and they're going to form up. And I'm not even going to bring up the word communism, but there are a bunch of American-owned sugar mills. No, Roosevelt has to do something. The American investors alone they have a direct line to the president because that's the point of being rich. And they're like, no, you get some troops the fuck down here right now. Roosevelt has no choice. He has been outplayed by the first president of Cuba.
Yeah, so Estrada and his entire cabinet just take their bat and the ball and they go home. Now, reading about Estrada in the US media in 1906 is hilarious.
Right.
I've got one story I want to I can't remember which paper it was, but I found this. It was in a lot of the papers, actually, because they just carried the same story. But headline is, Village Schoolmaster Who Became Cuba's President, Tomás Estrada Palma, whose regime is the issue in the Pearl of the Antilles, gentle in temperament, he favours peace, not war. Though born rich, he scorns gorgeous display of power.
Me too.
Bereft of fortune and parents and exiled for many weary years, he devoted his talents to the good of his countrymen.
Just call him Christ-like.
Goes on.
Just Christ-like.
Okay, well, They pretty much do. You ready for this?
Right?
He is as democratic as Jefferson. Admirers have conferred upon President Palmer several notable titles. He has been called in turn the Franklin of Cuba, the father of his country, and the Theodore Roosevelt of Cuba. I think Theodore Roosevelt was the Theodore Roosevelt of Cuba. But anyway,
There's two of them.
like Benjamin Franklin,
Right.
he ably represented his native land abroad in its struggle. Like George Washington, he fought for independence in the field and became the first chief executive of his liberated country. He was living in another country
Yeah.
at the time. It's like if Washington was living in London when he
Right.
was made president of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like Theodore Roosevelt, he was born into wealth, was highly educated, became a lawyer, but devoted his talents to political efforts on behalf of his people. But all such characterizations fail to assign Palmer his proper place as a historical figure. So many points in his career differentiate him from any other man in history that he is truly unique. Says one admirer, let us call him a patriot and let it rest at that.
Hold on, let me get this tear. Hold on. Okay. So he was everything.
Now, that
to
was
every
when the
man.
US
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
Back when the US media loved a Cuban revolution.
Oh, let me a good Cuban revolution.
50 odd years later,
Oh, evil.
not so much.
Evil. No, see, the thing is, Estrada was like, send troops down here, keep me in power. That is all I want. And Roosevelt was like, no, I'll send down a delegation and we will mediate. Which Estrada said, fuck that punta. And he quit, and he's causing all this problem because he wants the power, and he wants the power to come from American armed forces. So someone's got to run this fucking country because Estrada and his cabinet has quit. You would think it would be General Wood, but no, it's time for someone else to fill those shoes. And that is, and I hope I don't butcher this name, Charles Magoon. It sounds like someone's picking on him about his own name, but Charles Magoon, who was a lawyer from Minnesota. He is going to be de facto, legally, whatever, the ruler, the leader of Cuba for the next 3 years.
And I guess to be fair to Estrada, he's got 24,000 rebels
Yeah.
marching
go
on
back.
him with machetes.
Fuck that.
He's got 3,000 rural guards spread all over the island. He can't defend himself against that, so he needs the US troops to come in. In 1903, a statue of him had been erected in Havana.
Right.
And when Castro took over, it was pulled down. Apparently only its shoes remain on the plinth because they saw him as the guy that sold off the country to the Americans.
Pretty much.
And caused all of the problems. So he isn't popular as I understand it today. Certainly wasn't popular in the early days of the Cuban the next Cuban Revolution in the middle of the 20th century.
Right.
So he was seen as a traitor to the country by Cubans later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Americans that had invested in Cuba didn't want another civil war, didn't want the blacks to be running the country. So Teddy sent in 5,000 US Marines who arrived and stayed for 3 years to protect US property, basically, protect US interests, under the command of Mr. Magoo, as you said before, a lawyer from Minnesota who had most recently been running the Panama Canal Zone for the US.
He knows what he's doing.
According to the Springfield News Sun of Ohio, Saturday, 13th of October, 1906,
Right.
inhabitants will not be allowed to rule themselves until all is settled.
Okay.
Welcome to democratish, free-ish.
Right. On our timetable. Yeah. Yeah. But Magoon does get to work. He's got his troops. They calm everything down because you don't want to. I mean, machete goes up against Marine rifle. It's not going to end well for you. I don't want to jump ahead so you can stop me, Cam, but while his troops calm everything down, they're not fixing anything, but they're calming things down. Magoon, to his credit, he does get to work. He starts creating a more reliable electoral system. He starts working on rules for state bureaucracy. He starts establishing a small professional army, because that would have been great for Estrada to have at the point. So he's seen the mistakes, the earlier mistakes that the Americans made, and he's trying to fix them. He's also working on a new legal system. And again, this is going to take 3 years, but he to his credit, he is jumping in, he is acknowledging problems, and he is working on it.
And he sets up this new Cuban army under the command of a guy called Enoch Crowder.
Good name.
A.K.A. Bert Crowder. Yeah, it is a great name. Bert Crowder.
Right.
Bert Crowder had fought against Geronimo and Sitting Bull.
Wow. Yeah. He had some stories.
You know, that's pretty...
Yeah.
Yeah.
He had some stories. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and went on to be the Judge Advocate General of the United States Army.
Damn.
From 1911 to 1923, and implemented the Selective Service Act of 1917, which, despite America being isolationist,
Right.
figured out a way to get people to go and fight in World War One.
There you go. Yeah.
So they're doing that. They run the country for a few years again as an American colonial government.
Mm-hmm.
And new elections were run in 1908.
Right.
But I think we'll probably have to leave that for the next episode. But basically, the new government comes in. It's won by Jose Miguel Gomez, the guy that's been running for the last couple of elections,
Right.
or trying to, and he forces the US to leave the country again in 1909. But I think we'll pause there and we'll get back to that in our next episode, assuming I don't die of a heart attack between now and then.